The clock ticked softly in the operations office of Harper Machinery. It was the kind of sound that blended with the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant pulse of hydraulic presses, rhythm, order, and control. For 18 years, that rhythm had belonged to Stanley Rowe, the man who made the gears run on time. He was 59 years old, a mechanic's hands, a manager's patience, and the quiet pride of someone who built stability from chaos. His desk was clean, his paperwork precise, his world unshaken. Until the morning she called him in. Vanessa Harper, 28, the founder's daughter, sat behind her father's mahogany desk, legs crossed, manicured nails tapping a silver pen. Her voice was brisk, rehearsed. "We don't need old men like you dragging us down." The words sliced through the still air. Around her, the polished office reflected a sterile version of the company her father had built. Chrome instead of wood, slogans instead of grease. Behind her hung a framed certificate, MBA, University of Miami. Stanley stood there, unmoving. He'd spent years helping this company survive economic winters, teaching new hires who now looked away as he walked by. He had no reply, only a thin nod and a faint, sardonic smile, the kind that said, "You have no idea what you've just done." He didn't argue, he didn't plead. He simply gathered his things into a single cardboard box. A coffee mug, a photo of his late wife Linda, a few framed certificates, and a stack of old schematics yellowed with time. The younger employees avoided eye contact. The machines kept running, but the heartbeat of the floor shifted, slightly offbeat, like a rhythm missing its metronome. Outside, the winter wind scraped across the asphalt. Stanley placed the box in his truck, sat behind the wheel, and looked back through the windshield at the factory windows. Inside, his reflection merged with the shadows of the machines, his machines, and for the first time in years, he felt a hollow quiet that wasn't peace but suspension. What Vanessa didn't know, what she hadn't even bothered to check, was the clause buried deep inside his contract. A clause Charles Harper himself had written. If terminated without cause, it said, the employee shall receive severance equal to 24 months of salary. 2 full years. Non-negotiable. Ironclad. Charles had insisted on it years ago to protect his most trusted man from being poached or discarded. Stanley started the engine, eyes steady. He wasn't angry, not yet. But something shifted behind that calm stare, something quiet and deliberate. This wasn't an ending. It was the first movement in a longer symphony. Charles Harper had been a craftsman before he was a businessman. He'd built Harper Machinery from a single lathe in his garage 43 years earlier. To him, metal had memory. Machines had souls. He'd chosen Stanley not for credentials, but for grit. Men with sense and skill build things, he'd said once. Degrees just decorate the shelves. When Charles's health declined, Stanley became the quiet steward. Together they created something rare in modern manufacturing: trust. Clients stayed because Harper's machines worked, and workers stayed because Stanley treated them like craftsmen, not cogs. But Vanessa never understood that language. She spoke in PowerPoints and market trends. She'd spent 2 years in Miami, surrounded by tech investors who measured value in decimals and hashtags. When she returned, she saw Harper Machinery not as a legacy, but as potential capital, a brand waiting to be rebranded. Charles watched her with cautious affection. "She needs to learn," he told Stanley, leaning on his office doorframe one afternoon. "Some lessons don't come from books." But when Charles retired 3 months later, something in him seemed broken. He handed Stanley a copy of the new organization chart, Vanessa's name printed at the top in bold serif font. "I made her promise to keep the core team," he said, voice soft. "You, Thomas, Jennifer. The experience is what makes this place work." Stanley nodded, but Charles couldn't meet his eyes. And so the promise dissolved in a single morning. At home that night, Stanley poured black coffee into his old thermos, the one Linda had given him when she was still alive, and spread his contract across the table. His lawyer friend, Harold Preston, sat opposite, glasses perched low on his nose. Harold tapped the highlighted line. "It's airtight. They either pay you or face court. If they fight it, we'll win. And they'll cover my fees too." Stanley looked out the window at the maple tree he and Linda had planted 26 years ago. It had survived lightning strikes and disease. It bent but never broke. He whispered. She thinks she's starting fresh, but you can't build something new on the ashes of people you don't understand. He didn't mean revenge, he meant balance. That night he called Thomas Baldwin, the head engineer, and Jennifer Hale, quality control supervisor. Both over 50, both fired the same week, both sounding lost. "Check your contracts," Stanley said, "then call Harold." By dawn, he'd also made another call, one he'd been postponing for years. "Douglas Clean," he said when the line clicked. "Still interested in that conversation?" The owner of Precision Parts, a competitor across town, laughed low. "Stanley Rowe, the legend himself, I've got a corner office waiting." Stanley didn't smile. Not for an office, for an idea. 3 days after his dismissal, Stanley sat in a downtown conference room across from Vanessa and Harper's young corporate attorney, a boy who looked barely out of law school. Harold was beside him, briefcase open, contract neatly displayed. Vanessa's impatience filled the air. "We're restructuring," she said. "That's cause enough." Harold's tone remained calm. "The contract defines cause as performance issues, ethical violations, or criminal acts. Were any documented?" The young lawyer flipped through a thin folder. "Nothing." Then, Harold concluded, termination without cause requires 24 months severance, approximately $320,000. Vanessa scoffed. "We'll offer 6 months. Take it or leave it." Stanley stayed silent. Her arrogance was almost theatrical. Harold closed the briefcase. "Then we'll proceed legally. Discovery should be interesting, particularly regarding simultaneous terminations of employees over 50. The young lawyer paled. Vanessa shot him a glare. "You'll be tied up in court for years," she hissed. "And good luck finding another position at your age." That's when a quiet voice came from the doorway. "That's enough, Vanessa." Charles Harper stood there, thinner now, eyes clouded but steady. His gaze carried decades of command the room could still feel. He stepped in, closed the door, and spoke to the attorney. "Prepare the severance as written." Vanessa's jaw dropped. "Dad, now." She fell silent, hands trembling. Charles turned to Stanley. "I apologize. This isn't how I wanted things to end." Stanley only nodded once. Between them lay years of unspoken respect and disappointment too deep for words. As he left, Vanessa whispered, "This isn't over." Stanley didn't reply. He didn't need to. He already had something she didn't. Loyalty. The kind that no spreadsheet could quantify. The severance hit his account a week later, $320,000. He didn't celebrate. He didn't even smile. He simply looked at the number, then closed the laptop. Because money wasn't the point. Legacy was. The diner smelled of burnt coffee and old vinyl. Stanley sat opposite Thomas Baldwin, who stirred his cup without drinking. "They want me to sign an NDA, Thomas muttered. 5 years. Can't discuss processes I helped design." Stanley slid a business card across the table. "Douglas Clean, Precision Parts. He's looking for consultants. No NDA required." Thomas frowned. "You stirring the pot, Stan?" "No, I'm building something." For the first time in weeks, Thomas smiled faintly. "Custom hydraulics, isn't it? The small batch, high margin stuff?" Stanley nodded. "The future Charles always believed in, the one Vanessa's killing off to chase mass production." "She thinks she can compete with overseas labor. She can't," Thomas said flatly. "Exactly, so we'll do what she won't, build quality." 2 months later, inside a repurposed warehouse on Indianapolis's east side, the sign went up, Cornerstone Precision. Stanley didn't name it, Thomas did. "Because everything strong," he'd said, "is built from the corners up." Douglas Clean provided funding, machinery, and faith. Stanley brought blueprints, systems, and heart. Within weeks, 7 former Harper employees joined, all top performers. Each of them carried stories of how Vanessa's cost-cutting got-hit their departments. Jason Wright, the CNC programmer, had quit after she slashed his budget by 30% while doubling her own salary. Jennifer stayed in Harper's lab, feeding Stanley inside information, quietly, carefully. One afternoon, she texted him a photo. Internal memo, production delays, missed deadlines, 3 major clients threatening to pull contracts. Stanley showed it to Douglas. "Just as predicted," Douglas said. "When you drain experience, the veins collapse." Stanley said nothing. The photo didn't bring joy, it brought pity. He'd known those workers for years, families behind every paycheck. He didn't want Harper to burn, he just refused to let legacy rot. By summer, Cornerstone had secured its first major order from Midwest Manufacturing, one of Harper's former clients. Stanley made the call personally. "We'll be operational in 60 days, he said, "and we'll deliver what we always did, reliability." That night, standing on the mezzanine overlooking the floor, he watched the new machines come alive. Sparks flew, gears turned, light rippled across polished metal. The symphony returned. New instruments, same melody. Then his phone buzzed. Charles Harper. Stanley hesitated, then answered. "Stanley," the old man said, voice weary, "I know what you're doing." Stanley stayed silent. "I'm not asking you to stop. I'm asking for help. She's selling assets, cutting corners on quality. The board's panicking." "Why tell me?" "Because you're the only one who still knows this company inside out, and because I should have listened when you said she wasn't ready." A pause then. "Come to my house tonight, 7 o'clock. Bring Thomas. The board wants to talk about options." Stanley looked down at the bustling floor below, the future he was building from ashes. He exhaled slowly. "I'll be there, but I'm not promising anything." "Fair enough," Charles said softly. "And Stanley, thank you for still taking my calls." 6 months after his firing, Harper Machinery's conference room was filled with tension. Vanessa sat at the head, surrounded by her young executive team, suits too new, faces too nervous. Charts glowed on the wall, arrows pointing down. Revenue down 37%, 2 major clients gone. Quality control failures spiking. Vanessa clicked to the next slide. "Market fluctuations," she said quickly. "Legacy inefficiencies." She didn't see him at first. Stanley, standing quietly at the back of the room, her voice faltered. "What is he doing here?" Charles, seated among the board members, nodded to the chairman. The older man rose. "Vanessa," he said gently, "the board has reached a decision regarding leadership." Her face turned pale. "You can't be serious." The chairman turned to Stanley. "Would you like to explain the arrangement?" Stanley stepped forward, folder in hand. The same briefcase Harold once carried. He placed it on the table. "Harper Machinery is merging with Cornerstone Precision," he said evenly. "The board approved the acquisition this morning." Vanessa laughed sharply. "This is absurd. I'm the majority shareholder." Charles stood. "No, you hold 20%. I still hold 51%, and I voted in favor." Stanley slid the documents toward her. "Cornerstone will absorb Harper's custom hydraulics division. The rest will continue under new leadership." "Whose?" she demanded. A voice answered from the doorway. "Mine," Thomas said, stepping in. Vanessa's hands trembled as she flipped through the papers. "You can't do this." Stanley met her gaze. "This is business, nothing personal." But of course it was. Everything about it was personal, just not in the way she thought. Outside, winter snow began to fall again, soft and silent. Inside, a legacy quietly changed hands. A year later, the merged facility stood alive, wider, brighter, humming with purpose. Workers moved like clockwork between stations. Old faces and new faces shared the same rhythm. The logo on the wall read, "Cornerstone, Harper Custom Hydraulics." Charles Harper leaned on his cane beside Stanley on the observation platform. He looked frail but content. "Quarterly numbers came in," he said, handing over a report. "Best in 5 years." Stanley nodded. "Because we stopped cutting corners." Below them, Jason trained 2 new programmers. Jennifer, in her white lab coat, inspected components with clinical precision. Thomas sketched designs by hand before digitizing them, the old ways meeting the new. Charles smiled faintly. "Vanessa called yesterday from Miami, starting a consulting firm." Stanley didn't respond. "She asked if I'd invest," Charles continued. "Will you?" "Told her to come back to Indianapolis first, learn the business from the ground up." He chuckled softly. She hung up, but called back this morning, asked if the offer still stood. Stanley exhaled. He didn't hate her. He pitied her. The arrogance youth sometimes mistakes for innovation. Maybe one day she'd understand that progress isn't about replacing people. It's about building on what they've already made. Charles gazed at him. "When I wrote that severance clause, I never imagined it'd end this way." Stanley smiled, faint but real. "Neither did I." They stood together in silence, watching sparks of machinery illuminate the floor like constellations. Legacy resurrected. Not as it was, but as it should have been, forged from respect, experience, and vision. Outside, the maple trees rustled in the wind. The same wind that once carried him out of Harper's gates now whispered differently, not as exile, but as return. Some lessons, Stanley thought, cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the ones that stick, the ones that change how a company, how a person sees the world, are worth every cent. He turned toward the floor once more. The machines sang in perfect rhythm, and this time, the music was his.